Welcome to the webinar series entitled The Americas, Building the Future Together. It is produced by the Center for Latin American Studies and the Latin American Leadership Program. In this first webinar, we are dealing with the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis to Latin America. What are the opportunities for the region? The COVID-19 crisis is affecting the world in unprecedented ways, stretching thin the resources of both public and private sectors and exposing the long-standing tensions and growing edges of political and economic models. Latin America in particular has seen much of its hard-earned recent growth and democratization called into question. And the countries in the region have responded with widely differing political measures. This webinar series seeks to uncover trends and divergences across the region, aiming to uncover opportunities and best practices that can foster future growth and inclusion in the Americas. I will share with you a series of quotes that illustrate the severity of the situation. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, the crisis will hit hardest in South America, a region especially dependent on exports to China and impacted by plummeting commodity prices. According to a United Nations agency, the crisis in the region in 2020 will be the worst in its entire history, the agency said. To find a contraction of comparable magnitude, you need to go back to the Great Depression of 1930, which was minus 5%, or even more to 1914, which was minus 4.9%. Against this backdrop, Georgetown University's Latin American Leadership Program and the Center for Latin American Studies are convening a series of webinars under the title, The Americas, Building the Future Together, in order to explore the significance of the COVID-19 crisis for the future of the region. Today's webinar seeks to understand the opportunities for innovation that this disruptive moment may offer. In particular, it gathered experts to assess how the business and government sectors might seize this moment to foster growth and innovation for the region. It looks closely at the roles played by different industries, commodities, financial market in the region, and how the realignment might unleash new opportunities despite these difficult times. This event will be recorded and the video will be posted to latinamerica.georgetown.edu after the event concludes. We will be collecting questions during the discussion. For those of you connected to the Zoom webinar, you can submit your questions using the Q&A section in Zoom. You can find the Q&A icon in the menu at the bottom of your screen. Now, I want to welcome all the people connected via Zoom and watching us live streaming through our website. We also want to welcome the Georgetown University community, the LALP Alumni Networks, GCL and ILG, Class Alumni Network, Latin American Board, friends and colleagues. Let me start now by greeting our four amazing panelists. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to be with us. I'll start with Muni Jensen, Senior Advisor with Albright Stone Group, where she uses her experience and expertise as a political analyst and former Colombian diplomat to advise clients on issues related to Latin American politics, United States Latin American trade, and public affairs. Among other great accomplishments, she has a master's in Latin American Studies from Georgetown University. Manuel Balbontin, Chairman of the Latin American Board at Georgetown University, partner and founder of Compass Group, Executive Chairman of Compass Group Holdings and Senior Investment Strategies. Álvaro Fernández Garza, Chief Executive Officer of Alpha since 2010. He joined Alpha in 1991. Alpha is a diversified holding with presence in 29 countries on 4 major divisions: petrochemicals, food, auto parts, and telecommunications. His major claim to fame is that he has an MBA from Georgetown University. Finally, I want to thank Professor Hector Chamis, professor at the Center, Adjunct Professor, Center for Latin American Studies here at Georgetown. He has written extensively in the academic and popular press on issues on democratic governance, populism on Latin America and Latin American development. He's also advisor for the General Secretary Luz Almagro in the Organization of American States. As we have seen, we are very fortunate to assemble such a good group of panelists that include political analysts, academic, business individuals in both finance and the industrial sectors. To get the conversation going, I would like to pose a question to the panelists and ask them to please give us an assessment of the region from your perspective. How do you see the situation in the region?
Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you to the Latin American Leadership Program for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here as an alum and as a Latin American. And although I'd rather be on campus today, I'm very happy to join everybody. And I particularly like the positive angle of this panel discussion, which it talks about opportunities. We are so deep in crisis mode that we really seldom stop to look for the light. As I was doing some last minute updating last night, I obviously got all the headlines about how Latin America has become the new global hotspot for COVID. So this is a really timely event and at a really important time. The numbers are very scary coming out of the region. And I think that this is a great opportunity to talk about innovation, to talk about opportunities that we might have in the region. So if you agree, I will do the homework of having the opportunities, and I have identified kind of 4 buckets, which I will explain very briefly. And before I get into them, I think that the main premise here is that there is no one actor that can lead in the solution. And in this case, and in the context of this event, it is a combination of work from the public and private sector that can help to really decrease the impact of what is the beginning of a pandemic era. This is not a short-term situation. It's something that's going to come, accompany us for the next, unfortunately, for a few more months or years, hopefully not. So I think the first bucket that I've identified is how Latin America can emulate. We are behind the curve, and that's important because we have an opportunity to look at other countries and at what the positive and negative responses have been, both on the government and on the private sector side. We can even look a little farther back into the 2008 crisis and see what lessons can be derived from there. Emulate what countries not only are doing in the health front. I think we'll stay away from the health front and concentrate on business and the economy, but also on balancing the health and economic priorities. And then we have to look at different actors that have used private investment. Private investment is perhaps the most effective tool for recovery, and that requires an important partnership between the government and the private sector. And we can learn even from countries that are very, very criticized right now and have been part of controversy, which is China. China had some interesting findings lately, or announcements lately, about trying to develop a market reform, trying to develop more tools for foreign investment, opening up different sectors for foreign investment. They're reading the room really well. And not only that, creating a 10-year plan that they're implementing pretty aggressively. I think that as we look at what China is announcing, we should definitely try to derive some conclusions there. And then, as we've all talked about, there's a lot of hype about global supply chains. As these supply chains are being reformulated, I think Latin America has a role to play. Brazil, Mexico, countries that are large and want to diversify, have a seat at the table in this kind of reshoring and rebuilding of supply chain. So that is on the emulate, which is fancy for copy the good stuff and avoid the bad stuff that other people are doing. The second is innovation. Innovation is the key word right now. This is a long haul situation. We're not just adapting for the short term, for the confinement, for finding ways out of this specific situation. I think it's an opportunity for Latin America. There's a very interesting, robust group of startups in the region. I think it's a chance for the government to really support these startups, to try to identify which ones are more relevant at this time. And I'm thinking of e-commerce, of telemedicine, telehealth, education, food delivery, all of these financial services. The fintech in Colombia, for instance, has been growing, in Chile as well. I think that is an opportunity to work with governments to support these innovative technologies and really understand first what the consumers are going to look like, or what they're starting to look like, not just in the coming months, but in the coming years, and start with the low-hanging sectors and move from there. the third, and I want to, before I go into the third, give a good example of something Colombia did. They'd opened up a very interesting stimulus package for moving production of film and television into the country. Even in the middle of the pandemic, they came up with the regulation necessary for companies to come in. What's happening? Companies are coming in. These are jobs on the ground that are moving very quickly. So this is a type of, and they did it in consultation with the private sector. This is just kind of one example of something that creates immediate results. Third is engagement. You talked about commodities. The market for commodities is looking grim. For years, we've been trying to say that Latin America needs to diversify beyond commodities. And I think that it's important to move beyond that. How? And I'll go briefly into some important relationships that we need to calibrate. One is obviously the relationship with the US. Trump has left the conversation. The US has walked away basically from participating in business around the world. It's been focusing, especially in Latin America, on immigration, national security. There's an interesting foreign policy article that says Latin America, basically the keyword is Latin America alone. So what can we do if the government has walked away? Engage with business. Business has been notably absent in infrastructure projects in Latin America. US business has been in the region a long time. We need to engage with US private sector partners. The US private sector needs to guarantee that or try to at least push for investor protections in different countries and for the good rules of the game for them to engage. We've all heard about the experiences of companies trying to find food, medical supplies in China. We now realize that governments around the world have started engaging with China and with other Asian countries. That engagement should turn into something more productive beyond the PPEs and the masks and everything, and turned into maybe a long-term relationship. Finally, the region, it's an opportunity for multilateralism that has not really taken off in the past, and it's important as governments can focus their agendas on building confidence to work together. And the final kind of bucket, I think, is the idea of developing a vision, a long-term vision. I have to mention the commitment to gender equality that companies and governments have to engage in, the alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. When there are countries like Chile, like Mexico and Colombia, where entire cities have been destroyed by earthquakes and they built the cities back with anti-seismic technology. I think that's a good analogy for what needs to happen in the industries that are severely affected by the crisis and need to rebuild. They need to rebuild with anti-seismic capacity in terms of growth, flexibility, equality, sustainability. So finally, one thing I want to lead, and it's very much in the context of the Georgetown Leadership Program, the real difference between success and failure of any of these things is leadership. And we've seen the great examples of leadership and faulty leadership stumbles. And I do believe that one important component is both in the private sector and the public sector to try to hold our leaders accountable and to try to make sure that this differentiating factor really happens in the region, and to use the citizens and tools like these leadership programs to build a commitment to having people making good decisions and avoiding bad ones. Thank you.
Wow, Moni, now we're all pumped. My God, that was, it doesn't get more optimistic than that. We are all happy. You see, like we were all about to cry. We started crying. I gave all these figures about it's the end of the world. And then you throw at us like, this lifesaver, emulate, innovate, engagement, vision, leadership. Man, now I'm pumped.
I thought I was going to speak after Hector, so I wanted to cheer everybody up.
Yeah, no, don't worry. Now, even Hector is pumped. Look at him. Even him is smiling of happiness. Anyway, Manuel, cuéntanos. So, what is your assessment of the region?
Yeah, I think that when we look at Latin America, we have to look at how was Latin America prepared for this crisis, because clearly we were not expecting it. It was surprising. But in many ways, I think Latin America in this crisis much better prepared than the last one we had. On one side, we have different realities. It's not, Latin America is not one country, and therefore there are very different realities among them. but you have countries like Peru, Chile, Panama, Colombia, Uruguay, Mexico, with very good fiscal discipline. In fact, much better than most European countries, with the exception of a few, much better than the US, etc. With that fiscal deficit starting this crisis below 3% in those countries, with debt to GDP anywhere between 30 to 60% on those countries when you compare with countries in Europe or with over 100%, US with over 100%. So in many ways, Latin America faces this crisis that will have to spend a lot of money in a much better fiscal position. There are exceptions like Brazil and Argentina, but even Brazil, it has changed their debt profile substantially more depending on domestic debt than international debt. Argentina is a different story. Argentina was in trouble even before this crisis, and I think they will face it even a bigger trouble. And those countries, both deficits were higher and the debt to the GDP were close to 100%. So the realities is different, but overall Latin America in average, it's in a much better position from the fiscal standpoint. From the monetary standpoint also, Latin America, I think, I can't remember any of the latest crises where Latin America had mostly every country has floating exchange rates. And those floating exchange rates are critical in this situation because the competitiveness of this country has improved because of the devaluation of their currencies. It has negatives in their population, but it has many positives for their main exports, which in many of these situations are the commodity. So on one side, yes, there is a big impact on the prices of commodities globally and the demand on commodities, but at the same time, you see the Brazil real devaluating by 30%, the Mexican pesos by 20% from the beginning of this crisis, the Colombian pesos almost 20%, and so forth. So in many ways, I believe that in some way having this flexible exchange rate improves the ability of these countries to really cope with this situation and make it more competitive and prepare whenever this recovery from the US, China starts coming and their demand from commodities improve. The negatives, I think, if we look at the two biggest negatives from my standpoint, is labor informality. Labor informality in the region is huge. Not only is an economic problem that is always a problem, but in a situation like this, that the countries are putting massive fiscal measures to try to help the situation, it's very hard to distribute that. I'll give you one example, Peru. Peru has been the most aggressive fiscal program of the whole Latin America. 12% of GDP has been announced and is being spent, but it has been able to deploy it in a very slow manner because it has almost 70% of informal labor. So you see that compared with Chile that has announced almost half of it, 7.3% of GDP, but has 30% of informality, and therefore Chile has been much more able to spend this money efficiently and distribute it to the people. And the other biggest negative in my view is when you look at the industrial composition of Latin America, with the exception of Mexico, and I'll leave Mexico aside a little bit, it's very problematic in this situation. We are an investment firm. We analyze whenever we look at the investments, the industries, and we have clear winners and clear losers. And then we have a lot of industries that are like in the middle. They are somewhat defensive. So on the winner side, you have communication services, information technology, healthcare that are clear winners. Then you have clear losers, materials, consumer discretionary, energy. When you look at countries like the US and you look at the S&P, for example, 51% of the S&P is of clear winners versus 15% clear losers. So you see the US, clearly the S&P has done very well in this crisis. Most of the losses that we saw have been recovered. You see Latin America overall you have at around 11%, if you see the index in Latin America, 11% is clear winners versus 28% are clear losers. And clearly you see that Latin American stock markets are one of the worst in the world, meaning it's almost 45% down. China is almost 1-to-1 between winners and losers if you look at the index in China. Mexico, I said, is an exception because Mexico, of all the Latin American countries, is the only one that when you analyze their index, and I'm not talking about small and medium-sized companies that are not represented in these indexes, but in some way, these indexes give you an idea of the country preparation for this. Mexico has 20% of winners in the index versus 14% losers. So it has a much better composition than the rest of the Latin America. That clearly that gives you an idea of how Latin America is prepared. Then the question is how we can take advantage of this. And I would mention one thing, not to take too much time, and then we're on the discussion. I think the biggest area that I believe Latin America has to take advantage is the animosity that all this will cause vis-a-vis China. I believe in the short run, China is seen as a big winner in this crisis. In the medium term, I believe China is going to be affected. It was already started to be affected because of the trade disputes with the US. I believe that some trade disputes that may have with Europe. I think this animosity vis-a-vis China and the lack of transparency from China will make many corporates around the world to continue accelerating their diversification outside of China. Corporations around the world not only will favor efficiency and therefore where it was the cheapest to produce things and to supply things, but will also start looking at reliability, trust, etc. And that will favor countries like Philippines, Taiwan, Korea, because you can have companies there and companies might produce new plants, new production facilities there. But I also believe will favor Latin America, like Mexico. Mexico is going to be, in the medium term, a huge winner out of that. It's close to the US, has a free trade agreement with the US, and it's much more transparent than the US. All other countries like Panama, and potentially if Brazil continues this trend that Bolsonaro has started to open up, because Brazil and Argentina are the two closest economies in the region, Brazil might take advantage of this if at some point opens up better. So with that, I want to leave the rest of the panelists, and then we can come back to other.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you. You start by emphasizing one of the points that I always like, and I push that point very strongly, and that is the notion that one size does not fit all. When people like to think about Latin America, they make generalizations. They talk about the region and they say, well, and what you did very well was to open the eyes to whomever is listening to this, that, hey, be careful, they are not all the same. And then you touch on a very important angle, which is the fiscal discipline. I mean, to engage in the way we're going to be prepared moving forward, then the fiscal discipline is one of the most important dimensions, and they are not the same for all the different countries. Then the labor informality is something that has been always there, and then hopefully we can revisit that in the context of inequality and in the context of many of the problems that we have the most in the region. But now, you know, when you were talking about countries, you mentioned at least 19,000 times in Mexico, and I could see that Alvaro was growing in happiness. You know, every time that you mentioned Mexico, then Alvaro was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So Alvaro, why don't you tell us about Mexico and your perspective, given that you have a very important role to play, and I'm sure that all this is really affecting not only Mexico, but your companies in a very significant way. Alvaro?
Thank you, Ricardo. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I hope everybody is safe and all your families are safe too. It's been tough 3 months. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a few more months of this. Having said that, I think Muni and Manuel have said some very key things. I would say the big problem is we have the health issue, right? I mean, we have COVID-19 here. It's here. Some countries are handling it well, some countries are not. I would say, and I would like to contradict Manuel a little bit, I think we are not handling well at all. I think we're not doing tests, we're not buying tests, and that's across the region. I mean, look at what happened in Ecuador, look Brazil, look at Mexico. It's been horrible. And I think, at least in our case, we probably got the worst government we could have at the worst crisis possible. I mean, our government is not handling well at all this health crisis. I do agree with Manuel that they're doing well. Having said that, we don't know where this is going, right? I mean, I think there's 145 participants. I think we can debate amongst us for the next days, and we wouldn't know where this is going, right? I mean, is it going to be open in the next few months? Is Georgetown going to have virtual or presential classes in the next semester? I mean, it's incredible, but it's just a couple of months ahead, and we still don't know. But what we do know for a fact is that we are in trouble, economic trouble, right? I mean, businesses are going bankrupt. We see a lot of them every day throughout the region and in the US. We see a lot of unemployment, and that's going to hurt the consumption of other products. And that we already know for a fact. So COVID-19, is it going to be a vaccine? Is there going to be a medicine? I don't know. Is there going to be how do you say, you know, when it comes back, right? A rebound. Recurrence, right. Is there going to be a recurrence? I don't know. But what I do know, again, and we all know, is we're in economic trouble all over the world. And I do agree with Manuel that the fiscal thing, most of them are countries that are handling well, but define well, right? Because I think to avoid economic crisis, we need to put some fiscal deficit into the economy. And again, we can debate about this all day, but we already know that most of these businesses are going bankrupt, and nobody's helping them, right? I mean, these governments are mostly letting the private sector go on its own, and you know, it's your problem, and it's you know, even airlines. I mean, it's going to be a big problem. I think the U.S., in my humble opinion, is taking the right approach. I think the economic crisis is even worse than the fiscal and monetary aspects of it, and that they're doing, even though it's huge. But and to be on top of that, I think I do also disagree a little bit that China is handling this well. I mean, look at the way they're handling Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong should be like the point or the main attraction, right, to come to China. And I would be scared to be investing in China right now. And it should be the other way around. Us, Latin America, should be trying to bring this investment, not in the midterm. Now that they have these problems, they should be talking to President Trump and saying, look, and to most of the companies, for example, I'm going to give you a very good example. We have the Ford F-150, the most sold pickup truck in the world. It has 40,000 pieces that are assembled in 10 countries. None of them are Latin America, except for one. It's like, why don't you talk to Ford and say, look, you know, come to Mexico, come to Guatemala, come to Colombia, come to wherever. I'll give you this package. I'll give you this thing. Come and assemble the things here, and I promise you're not going to have the problems that you have with China. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not doing that? This should be like, forget about COVID. You know, that's another thing. The problems that the US and China on trade that they're having right now, we should be the beneficiaries of that. And we're not taking advantage of that at the best possible time for us. So I'm a little bit frustrated, to be totally honest, with that. I think, you know, if we do that, even President Trump would be happy that the investments come to Latin America as opposed to the US. He's doing a great job in trying to convince people to come back to the US. But I think if given the choice, some of the, I mean, to be totally honest and for practical reasons, a lot of the components, again, for the automobile industry are not easy to do in the US. That's why they left. But they're easy to bring back from China to Latin America. And we're not doing it. And again, he will be happier to bring them to Latin America than to take them to China. Of course, he will be happier to bring them to the US, but again, for practical reasons, they cannot be done there. So I don't know, Ricardo, I think I have mixed feelings regarding this.
Now, what you raise is interesting when you give the example of the F-150, which, you know, in the US, the #1 selling car is not an American car, which is kind of an interesting, is the Toyota Corolla. But in terms of the #1 selling overall vehicle is the F-150. So what Alvaro is raising is an interesting question. Now, I would like to think, we don't need the answer, but thinking, is that the responsibility of the US to bring all that to Latin America, or should Latin America get organized and put together a proposal like saying, hey, Ford, we can do it. Why don't you think of us? And then in light of all these problems, why don't you avoid the Chinese thing? And then let me tell you the plans that I have in Mexico. Let me tell you the plans and the opportunities that we have in the region. So maybe, question mark, should be an opportunity for the region to take the leadership. Going back to what Mooney was saying, the importance of leadership, any of those important leaders to actually assemble a set of manufacturing opportunities for the region and moving significantly away from the traditional commodities and being the main provider of, you know, raw materials. So it's an open question, which is interesting to debate. Okay, Mr. Shamis, give us the overall macro perspective of what's going on. So summarize all the great things that we have been debating and give us the positive spin.
Well, thank you, Ricardo. It's a pleasure to be here with you and friends for a long time. And well, let's hope that soon we're going to do this live there, not live on camera, but live, you know, on campus. I was listening to Manuel, and it was a breath of fresh air of optimism. And then Alvaro brought me back to reality because I am quite pessimistic myself. And for a variety of reasons. I mean, one short-term, one long-term. Long-term and short-term in the past. And let me share with you some here. All right, let me share with you this data. This is IMF. Hold on, let me try to make it bigger. Are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Okay. 2019 was not particularly good in terms of, this is IMF, World Economic Outlook in general. Was not particularly good in South America. Leave out Venezuela, the outlier, but still. Countries with positive growth, with the exception of Colombia, growth was quite sluggish. A couple of countries had negative growth in 2019, with negative current account balances as well. True, the fiscal balance is not here, and it was for the most part positive. We don't have that here, but inflation is a good proxy for that, and most countries have very low inflation, with the exception of Argentina and Venezuela. We know that. So when I see those numbers and I think about COVID now, I have a very, you know, somber reflection, which is, without COVID-19, we might as well have had this conversation in the same terms, or in pretty similar terms. Why is growth sluggish? Why are we so tied to cycles of prices? Why are we, I would say, incapable of learning? Let me go long term in a macro way. We had the best 10 years in terms of trade ever, between 2002 and 2012. The best decade, la década ganada, used to say some of the countries. The best terms of trade ever in the region. And Latin America is continues to be heavily dependent on international prices. It grows with international prices. It implements pro-cyclical policy for the most part. Very few countries have learned to do counter-cyclical policy. Very few countries have learned to save in the good years to have fiscal resources in the bad years. The fiscal position is good, but not in terms of central bank reserves necessarily, not in terms of having the resources. I mean, it's good in terms of GDP balance, fiscal balance, but not necessarily in terms of how we use the boom. We have not used the boom in terms of for investment in infrastructure, which we should have. Very few countries did it. We did not use the boom and all the windfall to invest in education. We did not use the boom for counter-cyclical policy. We did not. We grew, fostering consumption for the most part. This is a structural problem of Latin America. Latin America doesn't invest. The world doesn't invest. The Asians invest. The West consumes and borrows. And many countries have done some of that in Latin America. And we end up reproducing the cycles, magnifying the cycles when the economy grows out of robust international prices, and magnifying the cycle when the economy goes down. This is long-term because the price cycle has begun to change in 2012 and hasn't been very deep, but has been consistently going down since 2012, slowly but surely. And this is why, you know, your initial question, Ricardo, how do you see it? I see problems having to do with long-term trends in Latin America. I have your questions here. Let me say a couple of things. Latin America has to use comparative advantages and continue to provide commodities to the world. Indeed, Latin America could and should feed the world with the right policies and the right incentives. Of course, it will be a wise thing to do to add value to that productive chain. Financial markets will not be doing stellarly whatsoever. The IMF, the World Bank, the international financial institutions, there's been a call to capitalize them. OECD countries, some of them are in trouble, and they have already made the request to additional sources of lending. And let me give you a few numbers. Public debt in Japan is 237% of GDP. In Italy, it is 135% of GDP, and in the US, it is 106% of GDP. So we do have a financial situation that is not particularly comfortable. For middle-income countries in general and Latin America, there is a proposal by Carlos Alvarado, president of Costa Rica, that has been very well received in general, which is for lines of credit, long-term, zero rates, and for the most part for public health issues, but also for economic recovery. The multi-Latinas, it's interesting. In the beginning, Ricardo, you remember we were joking about we are a medium, pequeña y mediana empresa. And many of the multi-Latinas started as pequeña y mediana empresa. And so, you know, yeah, we need to protect them, and we need to continue to provide incentives for them to invest and take risk. The last thing I would like to say has to do with the students. That your question is, how do we prepare students? Well, it's interesting. Many units on campus prepare Latin American students who go back to either private sector or government. Your program, Ricardo, the public policy program, class program, prepare students to go back. We need to teach. Latin American policymakers need to understand the importance of counter-cyclical policy. We have not learned to do it. Very few countries have learned to implement counter-cyclical policy. Chile has always done it since the old days of the copper compensation fund, but lately the tax system in Chile has become a little weaker, and even Chile has been doing not as well as it used to. I think that is the way to prepare students for the challenges ahead. I also think that we have, if I may add, a complicated political situation that I would like to introduce, in which, well, let's put it this way. Democracy is not in the best of times right now. Democracy, constitutional mechanisms, and all the rights aspect of a constitutional democracy are not in the best times. Democracy has been challenged last year, even before this pandemic, legitimately or not. It's been a rough 2019 from a political perspective because of that. And the big question that everybody asks is, okay, once this is over, and how it's going to be over is unknown for sure, and it's not going to be over overnight, and it's going to be eventually a slow process until we do get some sort of cure, which is very scary because normally vaccines take 3 to 4 years to be considered safe, and here we're talking about vaccinating people at the end of the year or early 2021. But this is what we're facing, and we're facing, well, década perdida. We're facing depression. You mentioned it at the beginning. We need to articulate a lot more our regional response to this, because of course private and public sector need to work together, and we need to articulate the different countries' response in a more consistent and systematic way. It cannot be a cartel of default countries, some Argentina most notably, but that would be the worst that could happen for the future. So I will stop here, and we can talk and chat a little bit.
Thank you, Hector.
Thank you.
As we can see, we have seen an entire spectrum. I mean, from the macro level to the micro level to the specifics. I would like to bring and throw to the participants the different topics that have been raising questions. I have been getting questions through the webinar. So I would like to throw at you all the different questions, and then you pick the ones that you would like to address. But I think that many of them are very interesting. Let me just start by saying one topic that has not been mentioned in some detail has been the importance of green economy. The environment has been something that many people argue could be something that we can pay attention to right now. Gender equality, many of the participants are asking the question, should we be taking advantage of the gender equality? the regional response as a group? What country should take the leadership? Is there an opportunity, even though, I mean, Hector mentioned, and I think we most agree that democracy is not in its best right now, but how are the is there a country that will be leading? And then is there a country that we should be learning from? Another important topic, and then I'll see how you guys address all this issue, and then we retake all this, is the role of multilateral organizations. I mean, multilateral organizations, as we had in a previous webinar, are a very important source of financials, of money for the region. So how do we go about it? And even though many are saying, okay, China is an issue, we keep talking about China, and then I think that Alvaro addressed the China issue very well. But in terms of supply chains, do you guys see that there's going to be like an entire reorganization? Many people talk about the deglobalization into reglobalization. We can touch about all that. But let me just throw that at you and then see, you know, how the issues in the economic dimension, which is the main topic of this webinar, could be addressed to all these other issues. So anybody wants to start jumping at these issues?
You can go ahead, Ricardo, if you want.
Yeah, Alvaro.
There's been a lot of talk of deglobalization, and I think there's a lot of governments wanting to go that way, if not all. And I think it's going to be an issue. Having said that, there's a lot of value chains already made throughout many, many years that I think are going to be very tough to break, to be honest. So yeah, we all, most of the leaders in Latin America, and including the US, want to have more production of things in their own countries, perhaps for their own consumption. But if you think about it, I would say it's going to be more, for sure, some deglobalization, but more kind of a regionalization kind of thing, not necessarily a nationalistic approach, but more group of countries that have similar ways of thinking and more common interests in terms of geography, in terms of transportation, in terms of costs, in terms of who the clients are in the end. So, you know, why and I don't want to put it this way, but just to give an example, why China and Vietnam should be better than Mexico and Guatemala or Central America or Colombia and Argentina and stuff like that. So I think there could be some deglobalization, but in the end, the value chains are there. And if they change, they will be more on a regional way, not for the old, the 70s nationalistic approach.
Very good. I mean, I would like to add, to put something that I find is important. And, you know, resources are limited. We cannot be dealing with everything and all solutions at the same time. So we need to start thinking the difference between urgent and important. What do you think for you are the issues that urgent right now, that we really need to start addressing those right now? It doesn't mean that they're not important, but, you know, you cannot be dealing with everything. And can we just go back to the notion, is there a country or an industry that is better positioned we can learn from? Because, you know, we are talking a lot in the abstract, but are there like a specific examples in your experience that they are actually taking proactive action? Anybody wants to talk, like Manuel or Muni or Hector?
I think answering your prior question and this current one, I believe that the most urgent thing that these countries need to do now, and I believe some of these countries are very capable of doing it, is through fiscal policy to be much more aggressive. In fact, I've been very close to some of these governments talking clearly. Countries like Peru, countries like Chile, Panama, Colombia, Uruguay, Mexico, the countries that do have a relatively better fiscal situation in the region, they can be more aggressive. In fact, Chile could spend twice as much that has already spent, and I think it's urgent to help this situation because, again, I didn't try to imply before that these countries are handling all this well. I tried to imply that clearly some of these countries are well prepared to be able to respond, and if they respond, they can do or make a difference. And I think that Peru, Chile have been leading that, and I think they can do much more. Countries like Colombia and Mexico have done very little on a fiscal side. So the very, very urgent is you have to stop the crisis, to help the people, and hopefully this labor informality, you have to see a way to get to these people, because if not, can be very catastrophic in terms of humanitarian basis. Having said that, there are things that clearly these countries can take advantage. I don't personally believe in less trade around the world. I believe that, yes, there are two major great countries at odds, which is China and the US, and many other countries are on the fringes. I think Latin America being close to the US, I don't think US is gonna react negatively if some of these products are made in either Mexico or Canada or in other countries in Latin America. And therefore, there is a huge opportunity to take advantage of that and attract these people to come here rather than Philippines. I seriously believe that even before this COVID, people and corporates have been trying to diversify. They have been trying to go into other places. And they have found out that they can do it perfectly well in Philippines, Taiwan, Korea, or Mexico. Now, countries like Mexico or Panama or other countries in Latin America, even Brazil at some point, which hasn't started, should try to attract these companies and give them all kinds of benefits to do things there, to produce the Ford F-150 in Mexico or not in some other country. So I think those are the very big opportunities in the short run. And the other one is infrastructure. Look, Latin America, as the world talks about infrastructure, and we all talk about how possible it is. Look, infrastructure in itself is not a fiscal loss, because if you invest in infrastructure, it's an investment. There is a huge need in health services infrastructure, and we are discovering it in Latin America because we were very poorly prepared on a health basis. So there is things that can be done there, telecommunications, and a lot of other areas of infrastructure. So the countries can create major programs that will employ a lot of people in infrastructure projects. And they should do it and not talk about them, because the problem is we talk a lot. And those can be done immediately. And many of these countries have the means to do it. And foreign investors that are willing to invest. Look, we represent in some global investors, sovereign wealth funds that are interested in investing in many infrastructure projects, but many of them don't get done. So I think there are things that can be done and can be attractive very quickly.
Thank you, Manuel. Moni.
Let's address the who's doing it right. And I want to give the case of Colombia, and not about a country who's doing everything right, but it has engaged in some practices that have been successful, at least from the organizational point of view. Costa Rica, Colombia have been praised for their management of the crisis in terms of how they set up a structure within the government to organize and centralize all of the, both the health and the economic fronts. They've built a very interesting fund for the COVID fund. So that's they've structured a financial instrument. They're working closely with multilaterals to both short-term and medium-term solutions. They've done the right thing in communications, a little bit of overkill, but a lot of communications on the part of the government. And it seems like the management has been okay. It especially shines in comparison to some other countries in and out of the region that have really not, responded in the same way. As on the negative front, I think there is a lot of confusion, and that's part of what's happening in the entire world as everything, as this very, very global crisis has descended on us. The world is looking inward. And what needs to be a global coordinated solution has turned into sometimes struggles between city governments and states. We see it in Maryland, where part of the state is open and some of the, of the zip codes are closed. There's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of local responses. There's a lot of tribalism, and with you know, if you add to the soup the fact that institutions are strained for funds, there's much disorganization, and that results in something very dangerous, which is that trust is eroded between the citizens and their governments. And I think that's a key opportunity for business to step in where other actors are failing. And I do believe that we've been talking since I was at Georgetown 100 years ago about the need for Latin America to develop its infrastructure, to be less dependent on commodities, to diversify markets, to diversify their products, to join within as a region. That has not happened for the most part. And I think that's an urgent kind of task that needs to happen in the light of this crisis.
This is a fascinating. I would like, I'm sorry, Hector, please. Estás en mute.
Yeah, I'm there now. No, I wanted to react to 2 points. One is the globalization point that you raised, Ricardo. If anything, we are in a time of protectionism worldwide, or protectionist mood more than a time. But the pandemic highlights how global this is, that there is, if there is a painful reminder that the system continues to work as such, and the system needs global solutions, it's this. And this is, something to remember for those, the protectionist moods. Now, the gender issue cannot be emphasized enough, particularly in light of this public health crisis. 80% of the labor force in the health sector in the world is female. So talk about, the risks of, being a woman. I mean, and those who, and of course, domestic violence has skyrocketed for those who have been, quarantined. And so in the context of the quarantine. So the gender issue cannot be emphasized enough. And the focus has to be there. Finally, China. Yeah, I don't know if China is doing well or not, but I think this COVID-19 issue is going to linger. And it comes with Hong Kong. Australia is looking for partners to take China to some international court. There's been statements, not only by Trump, not only by the president of the US, there's been statements by the government of the British government, by the German government, that point to the, less than acceptable management of the crisis on the part of China. Just a fact. While the flights between Wuhan and Beijing were canceled, the flights between Wuhan and European cities had not been canceled. And well, when the West is mad, we do think we have the right to be mad. And lastly, Trump has his own style. Trump has his issues, we know, but it is true that we've been researching and writing and discussing about China's trade cheating for decades. And then he's the one that, put it on the table. And exchange rate manipulation, and among others, labor standards. We've been discussing that for decades. And now it has to be an issue regarding fair trade practices.
Thank you. I have 1 minute, but I want to get one more answer from you quickly. Remember, we are Georgetown University. We are in the business of educating. We are in the business of enriching minds of the newer generations. And that's why I always have this important question. Let's talk about skills for a very short answer. What kind of skills do you think we should be now educating or preparing the new generations to tackle? I mean, is there like a new set of skills? If you can summarize that briefly. I know Hector said before, learning about counter-cyclical periods, but anything else in terms of a big picture, what kind of skills we need to ask from or train our students into?
Global affairs. I think anybody who's in any type of educational institution from a very young age needs to understand the world that they're living in, and they need to learn how to be flexible.
Thank you.
Mooney is recruiting students for us.
Yeah, okay, keep recruiting, that's okay, okay. Manuel, skills?
I would say three things. One, entrepreneurship, innovation, because Latin America needs a lot of that to do new things, different than most probably we have done in the past. And the third one, teach them positiveness, because you're not gonna create anything and do anything if you don't come with a positive attitude into this
Good,
thing.
good. I love the positive one. Very good, very good. Alvaro.
I'm gonna sound a little bit soft, but I would say empathy.
Empathy. Like
and history.
And?
History.
History, very good. All right, guys, so you know we're taking notes. Hector, go ahead.
No, just listen to what the political scientist is going to say. Less social scientists and more engineers in Latin America. We don't educate enough people with tech degrees. We educate in Latin America exceedingly a large number of social scientists.
Okay, don't think that we're not paying attention. We're taking notes on all the things that you have been saying. We're gonna just disseminate that, and now you're gonna see a revolution in the way we educate. But I wanna leave you with a very, very inspiring thought for the region. And it's not originally mine. So it's from Darwin. He said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change." So guys, we have a responsibility in the region. We have to be optimistic, we have to be positive. This is something, let's take this opportunity to actually move Latin America to the place and the position that it deserves and where it belongs. I want to thank all the panelists for a great participation. Please stay tuned. We're gonna have more webinars like this. And thank you so much for your time and being here with us today. Thank you.